So I just got done listening to a 26-minute interview of George Monbiot talking about the Dutch farming protests and the nitrogen crisis in the Netherlands. And again, like his whole shtick is that we should go vegan, we should stop consuming animal produce, we should um, rewild farmland and all this sort of thing, and yeah, stop dumping nitrates into watercourses and things like this. And yeah, I I totally agree with the idea that we should make agriculture as non-polluting as humanly possible. I'm not a huge fan of intensive farming. Um, I recognize that intensive farming, as it is at the moment, has its place in our agricultural economy, though, and that there's an enormous number of people to feed, and that intensive farming is an incredibly efficient and highly productive means of feeding those people, and that's the reason why all intensive farming has arisen. It's because populations around the globe are increasing and have been for decades on end, and the population densities in places like the Netherlands is increasing. And and has been steadily for decades and decades, so that the population in the Netherlands hasn't increased much, but then again, the population of the Netherlands can't increase much because there's so many people per square mile there already, but it doesn't really have the capacity to increase all that much. But nonetheless, since the 1970s or so, it's been increasing by about 1 million people per decade. So this is why you have intensive farming, and this is why there's intensive agriculture in the Netherlands that's causing these problems with nitrate emissions. And yeah, like ultimately, well, it's to feed everyone. People have got to be fed, and like this veganism is not the solution. I know exactly what George Monbiot wants to say. He wants to say that oh, we can just survive on soy and coconuts brought in from plantations in the far-flung regions of the world. So what we need to do if we feed is like it's not just feeding the few 100,000 vegans that there are in, say, the United Kingdom. It is about feeding the 70 million people that there are in the United Kingdom, and that we cannot all be eating soy products. Definitely not. We can't be eating soy from the Amazon. We can't be eating coconuts from Indonesia. We just can't be. For one thing, is that there's probably not enough space left in what used to be Indonesian rainforest to cut it down for yet more coconut production. There's certainly not enough Amazon rainforest left to cut it all down for soy and have everybody eating soy. The vegan kind of movement, I'm sorry to say, is like highly naive and unrealistic. That's just the basic problem with it. Um, it ignores totally issues like, well, what if you have a black market for meat? So how would you begin managing that sort of issue? And the fact also that because they bring in all this produce from around the world instead of relying on the sorts of food that we're capable of producing domestically in countries like the Netherlands, like the United Kingdom, a large portion of which is of course animal produce. Um, yeah, then you get attendant carbon dioxide emissions from the planes and ships and trucks and trains that are transporting all this produce at the greater distance around the globe. And yeah, Monbiot like it doesn't account for that. He goes on about nitrous oxide emissions from the nitrate emissions being pumped into Dutch watercourses. He goes on about methane emissions, no end. You find that neither of those two greenhouse gases are anywhere near as impactful on the greenhouse effect as carbon dioxide is. That's just the truth of it. I think like I don't have the figures to hand. I did do the calculations for this at one point, but due to the far lower atmospheric concentrations of atmospheric methane just isn't as impactful a greenhouse gas. The rise in methane emissions over the years probably aren't coming from agriculture, and they probably are coming from shale gas drilling, i.e., from fracking. But the greenhouse gas issues, like it's somewhat beside the point, really, when it comes to the food supply. Um, since well, it's more an issue to do with eutrophication. Like, I don't think that agriculture really impacts climate change all that much. I don't think it's such an issue to do with global warming. I think the same and I think all this stuff to do with agriculture and climate change and methane and this nonsense, I think this is real nonsense. And I think this is very much distracting from the big issues that are really at play when it comes to climate change. And it's the same old culprits: mining and petrochemicals, heavy industry, all these sorts of things, aviation, domestic car use, all this sort of stuff. Yeah, and like and manufacturing and secondary and tertiary industrial sectors, and these sorts of things that are more likely contributing to far greater levels of greenhouse gas emissions than agriculture, by means of the fact that those industries, they're not growing anywhere near the amount of plant matter that agriculture grows, and therefore they're not sequestering the amount of carbon dioxide that agriculture sequesters. Because agriculture, out of all industrial sectors, sequesters obviously the most carbon dioxide, which is clear. And I know, like, Monbiot's also said, like, oh, but sequestration is not the same as storage, and I think I find it is actually. Yeah, it means exactly the same thing. To sequester means to trap. It means to store, roughly. But yeah, that's a quibble over definitions. That's relatively unimportant. But yeah, he says, oh, it goes back into the atmosphere again. It's like, some of it does go back into the atmosphere. Yeah, you're granted. But a lot of it does remain trapped in the soils and animal manures. So, I mean, yeah, like the fact that we have livestock eating things, that does trap carbon. And yeah, the carbon that the animals consume that was trapped in the plants that they consume via photosynthesis, that it does stay in their manure. It doesn't all escape via their emissions of carbon dioxide by breathing, right? So yeah, that's a lot of it is trapped still, but I grant you, yeah, not all of it remains trapped. So like animal manure is, like, in spite of the fact that too much animal manure being spread on fields, yeah, it will lead to eutrophication of watercourses, and that is a terrible ecological problem, I grant you. However, I think also in this issue, in this somewhat, like, pointed and really rather sensitive issue in agriculture in Holland, you need to, I think, have the wherewithal to see that it's kind of a balancing act, is it not? You have to see, on the one hand, that agriculture is trapping all this CO2. CO2 is the biggest contributor to the greenhouse effect, but it also does release nitrous oxide. Yes, it also does release nitrogen as well into watercourses and phosphates. So, which is not ideal, I grant you. And what's the solution that Dutch farmers are going to have to come up with by 2030 to have to bring themselves into line with EU law? They're going to probably have to cut their herd sizes down and move to semi-intensive modes of production, which I don't really mind so much. But again, with that, like, the answer is to do that. The answer is to de-intensivize agriculture. The answer is to de-intensivize livestock farming, not eradicate it entirely. And yeah, because in the total eradication of livestock farming, what you'll end up finding is, again, you have to rely on the rest of the world to account for the shortfall in production, right? So this is what the Netherlands will have to do also with their economy to make up for the fact that they're not producing as much milk and meat as they were before, right? So their imports of milk are going to have to go up. Their imports of everything is going to have to go up. Their imports of meat is going to have to go up. And I've lived in the Netherlands. I lived in the Netherlands for a year. I lived in Utrecht for a year, and food prices in the Netherlands, like, are not small. Food is not cheap there. Nothing's really cheap there, actually. But yeah, it's a wonderful country. I love Holland a bit. It's one of my favorite places in the whole world. And I think, what's going on with Dutch agriculture at the moment, like, well, it's probably something they did need to address a long time ago. And yeah, like, the farmers have been lobbying, just like, please don't fuck with please don't fuck with the agricultural system. And they're just doing it out of self-interested reasons, frankly, because they don't want to go out of business. They don't want to have to be forced into semi-intensive or extensive modes of production, and then have to have their productive capabilities undercut by foreign imports. And that's basically the anatomy of their their acrimonious, well, not acrimonious, that's a bit unfair, but their consternation with the Dutch government for making this decision. But like Monbiot, like, I'm sorry to say, on a different fucking planet when it comes to the decisions like that will ultimately end up shaping the world in the future and our agrarian economy. We can't, like, the fact that we consume. I need to make this point. The fact that we consume meat and dairy products has no impact whatsoever on climate change. None. I don't believe it does. Not at all. I don't believe it impacts the environment remotely. Not really. Maybe there's a little bit of CO2 emissions from tractors and farm vehicles. There's a little. Farms use electricity, sure, like everyone does. Like that sort of stuff that could be very easily tidied up, I think, with a bit of offsetting and whatnot, a bit of conversion to biofuels and put a few digesters on farms or whatnot to pump more renewables back into the system, make it more sustainable that way. Yeah. Oh, I just found the solution to the Dutch problem. Why not keep the intensive agriculture, just stick all the animal manure in biodigesters? That's what I should have said originally. On the on a comment on the George Monbiot video. I will do that right now. I'll also post this to